Hi guys, Tucker here with a new video, and this video will be a 2v2 tier list video for 10.1.5, and I've gathered a lot of opinions. I've gathered my own opinions because I play a lot of 2s these days, and also multiple specs and multiple classes, so I have multiple POVs, while someone that is one-tricking, like let's say a Holy Paladin, is going to detest his life versus a Preservation Evoker or a Resto Druid. While a Unholy DK is going to have a bad time versus an Arms Warrior, but an Arms Warrior is going to have a very bad time versus a Survival Hunter. So you have multiple layers towards that. So I'm going to talk about how classes are ranked towards each other. I have also added the tank specs into the mix because I think tank specs actually can work in twos. Not that great, but it can work to a certain MMR. And I think it's not like as troll as, let's say, some other like game brackets that you can have. And I'm going to try to have an opinion about every single spec that I'm going to put in every single tier, and I'm going to explain really quickly the tiers. So the god tiers are actually the actual best specs in the game for 2v2, and they are over S tier. And S tier is already a god tier spec, like an all god tier, but it's like over the top meta. And then you have like the meta specs, which are the A tiers. B tier is like good to average specs, C tier is underpowered, and D tier is like garbage, something like that, right? So trash, basically. Let's start with DKs. I think you have one spec which is like one of the better specs in the game that actually can work in twos and pretty well as well. You have another spec which is could be seen as a meme, but actually can work in certain scenarios with certain specs. And then you have like the other DPS spec, which is, in my opinion, worse than the tank spec. Let's talk about Frost DK first. I think Frost DK is the worst spec for DKs in twos. You can fight me on it. I think it's very gimmicky. You can work with a hybrid, I guess, but you don't have MS effect, so you are on a timer. You can work with a warrior, I guess, but then you are like in a super timer, so you don't have any peels, any heals. And the better specs that works with a Frost DK is actually with a healer. And I would even say with a Holy Paladin, because a Holy Paladin can bop, so you don't get disarmed versus physical damage dealers, like let's say a rogue, a monk, a warrior that can disarm directly your Pillar of Frost. That is a problem. Even Survival Hunter can actually like disarm you now. So I think that's the only spec that really works, and that you can actually like get not out like cheese, but you make your spec not cheesy and now like cheesy again, because you can actually bop it. But the problem is you have to aggressively bop, which often not makes you lose a game at the long run if it goes long. So for me, I'm honest. I'm playing Frost DK. I play Unholy DK. I even play Blood DK. I tested everything, and I do feel like if I had to put a certain tier, it would say that for me twos, it is really garbage. I know it's maybe an exaggeration, but it for me social for Frost DK is already very bad. I think in twos it's even more bad. You have like less CC to work with in your team. You have a lot less I would say help with the kill potential that you can have. You will lack some damage sometimes. You don't have an MS effect, which often not if you're facing an arms warrior, he's going to just out dampen you from the get-go. After 2 minutes, you're going to be running out of steam, while the arms warrior is going to have a healer which is more likely to have some mana, while yours is going to overheal most of the time, and even then it's going to be very hard to keep you up versus like specific specs. Of course, if you're first facing classes, you're going to feel good, but I'm the classes aren't really not that meta in twos, so it's very hard to actually give them extra points because they are actually good versus classes, because everyone is good versus classes. At least like the certain classes that I'm thinking. So for me, Frost DK is going to be D tier. I think Blood DK actually can work. It's not that great, so I'm going to put it in C tier. The reason behind it is actually Blood DK is actually very unkillable if they are managing to know how they play their class and their spec. In my opinion, whenever I'm getting focused, I generally win the games as a Blood DK. If I am not focused, then I tried my best to actually peel and try to do damage, because actually Blood DK actually pumps a bit of damage right now. And I'm actually very enjoying Blood DK. I think what I would like to see is them like remove the tanky aspect and be more of a support DPS and actually a DPS, and I would be like very much happy. Again, I'm like someone that really liked Wotlk, Blood DK DPS in PvP. But it was less of a tank at that point. It was more of a armor pen machine. But right now we don't have that, so I'm a bit like this, not disappointed, but like a bit sad about it. But I do like some Blood DK gameplay. While I think Unholy Decay is very strong, I don't think it's like God tier and twos. I do think it's A tier, and the statistics actually can talk for me. I think the hardest part is you do get countered by a few specs. It's actually very hard sometimes to actually survive because you are very uh, often on the receiving end of the focus. If you're focused by an arms warrior or fury warrior or even a survival hunter, it's very hard to actually peel you off. Good thing is you have Chain of Ice, which is something that is very strong versus warriors, and if you actually manage to kite very well, you can actually out damage them with just simply your rotation. Now, it's not as easy as it is because there is also a healer, and depending on the healers, you have to try to switch. For example, Resto Druid, you don't want to hit just one target, you also want to make the Resto Druid scared, so you have a better opportunity. It's one of the most aggressive melees. You don't really want to dampen the enemy. You want to really try to have a lot of damage that is actually unhealable and actually win like a lot of CDs because of that. But I think Unholy Decay is in an okay spot in twos. It's not like fantastic, but I think it's meta compared to other melees. And I think in general, you're going to have a better time with Unholy Decay than, let's say, a Blood Decay or Frost Decay. Let's talk about DH. I'm gonna start with Vengeance Demon Hunter. I have no info about it. I never faced one. I don't play it. I'm going to have a guess where Vengeance Demon Hunter is not that good in twos because I do feel like they don't have the same kind of damage as a Blood Decay or let's say a Protection Warrior or even a Protection Paladin. Um, it's very hard for me to have like a full-on opinion about it because it's very hard to actually have an opinion about something that we never saw. And if I go on the stats as well, you don't have even tanks in the top 500. I think in the top 1000 maybe you would see Avengers Demon Hunter, not even, right? So it's very hard to actually have an opinion about it even with statistics. For me, I'm going to imagine that it is on the same level as the Frost Decay. Probably cheesy if it works. I think Blood Decay is actually more reliable, and I will have to compare between them. I think Blood Decay. I would rather face a Vengeance Demon Hunter than Blood Decay. If I want to win versus them, that's my opinion. Havoc Demon Hunter in 2 is actually a pump machine. You have constant pressure. It's actually very hard to actually get peeled off as the Demon Hunter. I play with a Demon Hunter as a healer, and I do feel like it actually can pump very hard, and it's very hard to stop them, especially if you are like a Holy Paladin, you can just freedom him. Now, they are very squishy outside of blur, and darkness is very random, and if you get stunned in it, you will have a lot less value, that's for sure. You can jump into the sky, so that's something that's actually very strong. But depending on specs, it doesn't really matter if you're jumping. Like this is a BM hunter, do not jump, you're going to get destroyed, for example, or MM hunter or whatever range caster actually faces a demon hunter. So I think with that information, in my opinion, I do feel like it's A tier because it's meta and actually very strong versus casters because of the innate magic defenses that they have. I do feel like versus specific specs in melees, they actually can out dampen the enemy. They also have incredible cleave, so they can even just train the resto shaman, for example, and have a lot of success with it. In general, I'm going to think it's lower A instead of like higher A, just because I think they get outpaced by a lot of hunters. I think hunters kind of destroys demon hunters, especially since Diamond Trap is something that is very strong and has kind of the same duration as a Freezing Trap, if I'm not mistaken. Because it was lower duration before, but since the CC changes, I don't think the Diamond Trap is actually lower duration than a normal trap. I do feel like they can struggle versus them, especially with like Steel Trap. you're going to get like rooted, and there's nothing I can do, for example, to liberate you except the freedom. But freedom is something you kind of have to pop on the demon hunter if you want to have a lot of like uptime. I'm going to put it in A tier for now. I might change it at the end. But we can talk about priests. I think priests is like an interesting conversation. Even if you are watching the top 500, you have a lot of disc priests. Now, I'm still thinking that a lot of disc priests actually play holy priest statistics wise, because it's very hard to actually have like great statistics on websites because people can log off in as disc while they are holy priest. But I think disc priest is better in twos than, let's say, in threes or in solo shuffle. I think there is more time to actually deal damage. You can actually be a second DPS pretty much. You have a lot of value with pain suppression 2 times. You have dome, you have like rupture, very strong. You have actually like a lot of damage, and your CC is a bit limited, and that's why you are not really S tier. I think like they can be a respectable A tier because of how the bracket works. Don't come at me and say, but in threes or in social they're garbage. I know that I put them at a bad rating on purpose in social because it is the case. But in twos, you have a lot more time to actually participate in damage. And if you're not doing it as a disc priest, you might change your partner because maybe your melee or your caster is actually too squishy to make your spec work in twos, or you have to look into your own gameplay and see what's going wrong, because you are able to normally do a lot of damage. Sometimes uh, uh, the half of your DPS as a melee or a caster should be your disc priests adding up. So that's pretty much how they work. And whenever I'm facing a very good disc priest, they are out damage a lot of things. I think a lot of healers actually can out damage specs. Like other healers actually work very well in twos because you actually want the extra DPS, especially with dampening how it works and how it's supposed to be. Healers being like there and being active is a lot more valuable than, let's say, a passive healer. Like for example, caster mistweaver is actually very bad in twos. That's already a spoiler, but we can talk about fist weaving as well. Shadow Priest is actually very strong in twos. I do prefer to, if I'm playing like, let's say, with a Shadow Priest, I prefer to be double DPS instead of, let's say, a healer, because sometimes you will lack some damage. That is just how it is. It's not meant to be like a twos power machine. Not a lot of specs are like that. But I do feel like they are like one of the better casters. And if I'm like looking at casters, I do feel like it's a deserving A tier. Again, do not come at me like, oh, but Dogray, Soul Shuffle and trees, they are gods here. Look, I know that. That's not a problem. But in twos, it's a lot easier to stop a Shadow Priest than, let's say, a threes. Your self heals is also a bit more like diminished because of twos and dampening and how it works. You have to actually have another DPS to be able to have constant pressure and actually make them go on the back foot. While if you're like the sole DPS, it's a lot easier to manage. Although you can self CC the other healer pretty easily, not a lot of like melees or casters are going to let you do that. They can actually pop a defensive to respond to it. So for me, it's going to be A tier. It's still going to be very interesting. You can play with a sub rogue, you can play with an affliction warlock, you can play with a mage, you can play also just in general with another healer, like an aggressive healer, like let's say a resto shaman, for example, or you can play a very dampening spec, very dampening comp with a restoration druid that's also working, but the restoration druid has to play kitty form and actually be able to do a lot of damage as a kitty, but you can make it work. You can even play with a feral druid and make it work. I've seen a lot of shadow priests actually, like, again, defeat me because of their comp and how they work. But if you're playing with a healer, do expect that you are going to have some struggles to finish up some games. Holy Priest is, for me, the second best healer in the game. I do think it's a god tier spec. Now, I might change at the end and put it in S tier because it depends on how I want to see it as what is a god tier spec. But for me, right now, healer wise, the Holy Priest is a god tier spec in twos. They have stun, fear, they have like a lot of ways to be annoying, but also a lot of ways to actually bait kicks. Mind games is super big. You want to kick that, but it's the only shadow spell that they have, I would say, that is meaningful to kick. But you're opening them up actually in Holy School, which is the school that you want to kick. Holy Fire does a lot of damage, and they have more time to cast it in twos than in threes, and it does rival like damage wise to a Disc Priest. They also have a lot of like utility spells, like for example Void Shift, which is also Shadow, but they're not going to mind games and then get kicked and try to Void Shift. That's stupid. They would like try to heal, and if it doesn't work, they're going to Void Shift. But I think in general the difficulties that they can have in threes or in Social Shuffle are not as apparent in twos, and even then I think in threes and in Social Shuffle they do fare pretty well as a healer. So for me, God Tier right now, I think it's deserving. The same for Brewmaster. Really, I do not have any data about it. I seen like in the top 1,000, there was like a Brewmaster, but it could also like be someone that is just going to DC as a Brewmaster, and you will get like a Brewmaster stat. Um, I do I do feel like it's I do not know how much damage he actually can deal. I have not seen one. That's the issue. I have seen like Blood Decays. I've seen Garden Druids. I've seen Protection Paladins and Protection Warriors. Me myself, I tried to play a lot of like tank specs to make it work. And I think in general, Brewmaster is maybe the one spec with Vengeance Demon that I just simply do not encounter. So I have a difficulty to actually form an opinion. But if I have to guess, it would be D tier. Windwalker, I think it's very strong in twos. They have a lot of physical damage. They do get countered by a few specs. I think I'm putting in at the same tier as like Unholy Decay and DH. I think ahead of the Unholy Decay, it's very hard to put it in S tier because I'm thinking about other specs where I do feel like, look, that's a clear S tier or God tier. Windwalker in twos, it's like a bit less like in threes. They didn't kind of need some help to have a full value like damage rotation, damage potential, and like it's not like a Frost Decay where they have to play around their goes. They have goes, but it's a lot easier to set up, and it's not like super limited to CDs. You can actually kill people without CDs as a Windwalker, although it's like in high dampening probably. You have huge damage. You can actually be very mobile and very annoying to deal with for a lot of specs, a lot of classes, which often in threes have like a backup that can help them. But in twos, they miss like that other DPS or other healer if you're playing double DPS to actually secure them versus a Windwalker. I think the damage is very lethal, so that by themselves they are A tier. Um, Mistweaver, should I say Fistweaver? I think Fistweaver is a okay spec in twos. I think Caster Mistweaver is actually not that good in twos. You can also see like they're not as represented in twos as well. In the top 1,000, you only have like 51 of them. I say only, they don't have a lot of healers in general, but I think they are like faring okay-ish, but they kind of need to play Fistweaver. I think if you're thinking about caster with Fistweaver, it would be B tier. I would caster Mistweaver, it would be B tier. If it's a Fistweaver, I would say it's A tier, below Disc Priest. So I'm going to put it in A tier because I see a lot more like Fistweavers than caster Mistweavers. It's actually very hard to actually judge them on something that they don't really play into. So I'm going to put it in A tier, but I think it's more stoppable than ever. They do heal a lot less. It's also a lot more stoppable in general. And yeah, I mean, they are not like the boogeyman that they were like previous season. Um, Druids, I think it's an interesting thing. I want to talk about Garden Druid first. I think Garden Druid actually can work in twos. Like Blood Decay, they can be very annoying. So I'm going to put it in C tier, but I don't see that many Garden Druids because why bother, right? That's the issue. Um, well, issue. I don't really play. I don't really like to play versus a garden druid. They have a lot of like things that are very annoying to deal with. But they have CC. They can actually make it work. They have a sleeper, so it's actually very hard to focus them. Although they are very squishy if they don't have that. Um, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a C tier. They have damage. I think the damage is surprising sometimes. I think it's closer to the D tier than C tier because the self heals are impressive, but not as impressive as Blood Decay. And I don't think they fare too well in high dampening. And the damage is not like as high as, let's say, Blood Decay or Protection Warriors. So you can't really play around that. You can also correct me if I'm wrong. again. I know people are like allergic to tanks, but I think everyone would rather want Blizzard to actually make them support DPSs instead of tanks, so that you can actually play more specs. I think there's a lot of specs that actually are very fun to play. Let's say, I think Bloody K is one of the most fun specs to play as a tank in PvP. But I think it can very much work as a full-on DPS. I just think you have to strip them away from the tankiness or give them supportiness, so you can actually play them as an augmentation evoker, kind of. Um, Balanced Druid. I think Balanced Druid in twos are not as like scary as in threes or in Soul Shuffle. They are represented though. You have 22 of them, which is quite a lot for a caster. They often are played with a rogue or with a holy paladin, which is very dampening. It's not fun to play against that, but it's something they can actually play. You also see them sometimes double boomy or boomy feral or sometimes elemental shaman boomy. You have a lot of ways to play a balanced druid. I'm going to put it in B tier. I think it's okay-ish, good tier. It's stoppable. I don't really mind. I don't remember times where I am scared about balanced druid in twos. Yes, the occasional like 2v2 with a sub rogue can be scary because the burst is very high, but again, they're all the timer. If you do survive, you can actually win the game pretty hard. It is kind of replacement of a mage. If you're like 2v2 with a sub rogue, you can see it as a mage, and it can actually work pretty well. Feral Druid, I think it's the one of the S tier specs. They are very good. They are very represented as well. 40 of them, but often those 40 are actually very high on the ladder, so they deserve quite a S tier for me. The bleeds are very annoying to deal with. Yes, they can be countered by multiple specs, multiple races as well. But I think they have like again they have a PvP talent where they cyclone and they get like the next maim or next ferocious bite or whatever applies a feral frenzy, which basically just destroys someone and you cannot really defend yourself versus that. It's actually very unpeelable feral druid, and I think feral druid with a holy priest is one of the better like comps in the game. You have also feral druid with a disc priest. Depending on how feral druid survives, it's actually a very good comp. If it doesn't survive too much, like it's not that good. But again, you have to play around that to make it work. Resto Druid. Resto Druid is the first with Holy Priest to be God tier. It is one of the better specs. You just see that's the issue with how balancing works. It's actually very hard to balance it with 2v2 because if you think about 2v2, you would not buff Resto Druid. Resto Druid actually has a lot of damage with Feral affinity. Don't be scared to actually use it. You have to play with, let's say, Affliction Warlock to actually have optimized damage. You can also play with a Survivor Hunter, which is the God tier comp. It's really strong, and you don't really have to do damage, but you can actually add with damage. But I would recommend to let's say play with a class like Demonology Warlock or Affliction Warlock or Destruction Warlock, and they can survive quite a quite a lot. They can actually play like Feral Affinity and do a lot of damage. Feral Affinity, what I mean is like you go cast form and you put your bleeds, and then you go back to healing, and then you put a maim, for example, and then a cyclone, and you go on and on. Again, the energy ticks are very slow though, so it's a lot hard to pull off. But if you can pull it off, it's actually very strong. Even without playing aggressive, I think it's still god tier. But you can play aggressive and you become like one of the better resto druids in on the servers, right? But you're going to ask me why are they god tier in twos but not in threes? In threes they are garbage. I think mana wise, it's a lot more chill in twos. You can actually redrink pretty easily and pretty reliably as well. In threes, I think hotting multiple people is actually very hard and very draining. It's also easier to switch between them because you have like three targets to switch on. While in twos, you have a switch on the rest of the raid, but the rest of the raid is playing behind a pillar, which is very hard to switch on. For example, as a warrior, it's impossible to win versus a good rest of the raid comp, especially let's say a survival hunter with a rest of the raid. It's really impossible. If they play worse than you have a shot, and even then you might still lose. But if you are like even skill, I would say they are like evenly with you, like skill wise, you still are going to lose like 100% of the games. Of course, they can be garbage and you can win, but if they are like very high rated, they are for a reason probably. you are not going to get a game from them. That's how twos work. It's very rock paper scissors kind of gameplay. Retribution Paladin. I think in twos, I prefer my Retribution Paladin to be played with a double DPS. What I recommend is, let's say, with a warrior, an unholy DK is actually very fun as well, or with a warrior, with an enhancement shaman, and that's more. It's not dampening, but you don't have an MS effect, so you kind of play around the lottery with ascendance, for example, and also the lottery of Retribution Paladin actually dealing a lot of like one-shot damage. But the self heals is not that good anymore from Retribution Paladin, so you kind of lost a bit of like the edge of like double DPS being a thing for them. While Enhancement Shaman can actually make it work at double DPS pretty reliably. Retribution Paladin is a bit more scary at times. And if you have to choose between healers, I would say go with a Holy Priest to add DCC, so you can actually harsh the healer and he gets a chastise on the DPS. And also Disc Priest, which can add more damage to the mix, which is actually a very good thing as well. So for me, if I'm gonna think to be able to have a good opinion, I think it's a good tier. I do think it's below balanced druid in general. Because it's more stoppable. Dampening plays a lot for them, and in general, I think it's going to be a good tier to be a B tier. Protection Paladin. Protection Paladin is actually a surprising spec in twos. I think it's on the same tier as Retribution Paladin. You're going to say, but what the hell, Protection Paladin? We never see them. Trust me, if you see one, you're going to, and it's a good one, it's going to be very annoying to deal with. They have a lot of stops. They can actually heal for pretty much. Whenever I'm playing Protection Paladin to like test things out, because I try to make content, so I have to see what works, what doesn't work. I think the heals are actually very competitive. They do get very quickly though. So dampening is not a thing for Protection Paladin. You get after 1 minute of healing pretty much. And even then, I'm actually optimist. It means that you actually stop healing for a while. But you have damage, you have annoyance, you have CC, a silence actually. So you do a silence into a harsh, into a blind. It's actually very big. And then you coordinate with, like, let's say your ally that is putting a fear or whatever. So you can make it work. I do recommend to play with a Shadow Priest, for example. I do recommend to play with an Horror Decay. I do recommend with playing something that actually can sustain a bit, just a bit. Horror Decay is very killable, but they can actually sustain a bit with like the Necrotic Wounds, for example. It's very little though, but you can also play, let's say, with an Enhancement Shaman, which is very bursty. They have also a lot of self heal, so you can actually survive a long time. You do miss the MS effect, but it always depends on how you're going to play the comp, right? But I think personally, with a sub rogue, it is nasty. You only need like 2 or 3 goes and you win. But you have to survive those 3 goes. But you can pretty much like make subtlety unkillable, and they're rarely going to go for you, but generally the good play is to go for the Protection Paladin. So if you're facing versus a Protection Paladin twos, go for the Protection Paladin, cleave them both, and they're going to bubble very quickly. And if you play with a Priest, multi-spell like at 30% or 20%, and you're going to be good. Especially since the auto bubble at 30%, you can pretty much like multi-spell from the get-go, and you're going to be safe. You're going to kill them pretty reliably. That's a tip versus Protection Paladins. A Holy Paladin is actually very strong in twos, but I think it's not as good as Holy Priest. I do think it's around the same level as Disc Priest. Also, statistics-wise, they kind of tell me that I'm actually right on that. I play Holy Paladin twos. I do enjoy a lot. The healing is very good. You do get very quickly, because how I play is a very aggressive Holy Paladin build. I play with melee wings. I try to even Holy Shock on the enemies. I try to even Daybreak into triple Holy Shocks on the enemy to finish off. I often get killing blows because of that. But you do get because you have to use your tools offensively. Well, that's how I play. You can also play relaxed and it will be alright. The mana is going to be alright. But I do feel like sometimes if I play too relaxed, the games are way too long, but also way more like coin flippy. I prefer to be more aggressive, so they actually have to coin flip most of their CDs to actually see, look, if we're not going to do our city right now, we're going to die. And then they're doing it too soon, they're dying a bit later, or they're doing it too late, and then they get like holy shocked and they get like a glimmer proc where they're going to die from it. So it's going to be very fun to play as a holy paladin very aggressively, and it actually plays out like a holy, like a shokadin kind of perspective in twos. I do like my damage is rivaling disc priests, rivaling resto shamans. In general, you're going to have a great time. The only problem you have is like it's highly like CCable, highly dispellable. The bop like versus a priest is going to be a nightmare. Sometimes you're bopping your ally, and from the second it gets dispelled, so you don't have a lot of value from it. But you have ways to actually make it comfortable for you to have some pretty good wins. I think it's really fitting to be 8 tier. It's very close to be S tier, to be honest. But if I put it in S tier, it might be like Disc Priest, if I'm thinking. So I'm going to think the healer balances at the end of the video. I want to talk about Evokers directly. I want to take a swing with Evokers. I think augmentation Evokers in twos is actually very, very viable. I think just for now, nobody really plays it because I don't know why they're not playing it. But whenever I'm facing one, it's disgusting the amount of damage and healing they actually provide. I think for me, it's very viable. I'm putting in 8 here. Blistering Scales adds so much DPS to the like melee, and if you're facing the Evoker, you're like trying to kill him. It's actually very annoying to catch them, especially if they play the PvP talent with Hover being not able to get rooted or slowed. It's a nightmare for a lot of specs, like let's say Arms Warrior or a Fury Warrior even. You cannot catch them if they're playing smart. And if you're facing the melee and the melee is getting blistering scales, the problem is you're getting out damaged pretty heavily. And you see the damage details for the other DPS is like doubling your damage, and you're not even understanding why. That's because of blistering scales and other buffs that they get where they are going to add damage on you. Like it's disgusting. You can see it as a thorns, but like the uptime is way higher. Like it's ridiculous. It's very strong. And let's say they're Furrow Druid, because I've seen that they put thorns on themselves plus blistering skills. You're killing yourself by killing them. It's stupid. So you have to have weak auras or whatever to actually notice it. But if you notice, you have to step back. Don't challenge it. Just switch targets because you're going to get destroyed. I tested on my rogue. I got destroyed. It was pretty funny. Elemental Shaman. Elemental Shaman. Excuse me, Evoker still, huh? Devastation Evoker, I think it's B tier. It's meh. I would even say C tier to be honest. I think it's C tier. It's stoppable. Again, it's gimmicky because you will see it coming. Now everyone knows the deep breath into fire breath into. With the Shuddering Star and whatever. It's really highly stoppable. If you don't stop it, it means that you're like not pressing anything, and that's the issue. That's why you die. If you don't press things, you're going to die. But if you play it smart, you're not going to die versus Devastation Evoker. I think it's too gimmicky. It's like a Frost Decay, but it's less stoppable, I would say, than a Frost Decay, because the Frost Decay you can just disarm it. While Devastation Evoker, if you have no CDs, you can die pretty reliably, but you have to survive till then. So probably you're playing with a healer, which is going to be very dampening. But again, what you have to play is with a sub rogue as a Devastation Evoker. You can actually like cheap shot them extra, and you can have some reliable goes. But it's still like they die pretty quickly as well. So I'm not a fan of Devastation Evoker. Preservation Evoker is actually the worst healer, by the way. It doesn't fare well in twos. I'm going to put still in C tier, but I think it's really the worst healer. You just see it like on the numbers wise, only 5 of them in the top 1000. And you can say, but what does it have to do with the ladder? What? To be honest, Preservation Evoker is one of the most popular healers in general. Whenever it works, whenever it doesn't work, it's dropping down like an arrow, a shot from the skies, right? But in twos it doesn't work. I think the AoE healing, you lose a lot of components about it. I think it's a lot easier to switch on because you don't have like another DPS to save you on certain occasions. Communion is not that good. I mean, they have damage. You can make it kind of work, but it's not fantastic. And there's a reason why people are not playing it in twos, because for me, it is like one of the easier matches. Whenever I see a preservation evoker, I see, okay, I'm going to win either with mana, or I'm going to destroy them with damage, or I'm going to destroy them with CC. And their CC is actually very stoppable. As Steepwalk, you see it from a miles ago, and you can actually line it pretty quickly. And even if they are like using hover for it, you can even punish them with just a Hodge, for example, if you're a holy priest, holy paladin. So you have ways to make it work. But I think they're probably one of the better features, because it's still a healer. You can still heal, which often twos, if you're playing double DPS, it's actually very hard to face like one of them. But I don't think it's like fantastic. It's especially versus priests, where these spells are more likely to be in twos. Well, in threes you don't have really a lot of time to dispel most of the time. In twos it's easy to dispel the hots, and the hots are actually everything for preservation evoker, so pretty reliable to stop. I want to talk about hunters really quickly, because I think a lot of people are waiting for it. Survival hunter is like, without a doubt, just got here. I think even above resto druid and holy priest. They actually are god tiers with resto druids and holy priest with either. So if they play with holy priest, they're going to be god tier. They're playing with a resto druid, is going to be god tier. They're very, very efficient. You can even make it work with a disc priest, but I would not do that. But you can make it work. It's one of the most played specs as well in twos, but also the most represented in twos. It's nasty to stop, very hard to stop. Casters are going to like hate it. Versus a feral druid, you can actually just bandage yourself or your friends. It's not fun. It's not fun to face one. And imagine if like they're like a dark dark iron dwarf, for example, or just a dwarf. They can dispel themselves with just a ratio. You can also play Night Elf, and then they have like a reset. It's really, really strong. It's really hard to stop one in twos. It's really hard to win one. But if they are like equally leveled as you or equally skilled as you, it's really a nightmare to make it work. So I think in general, I put it reliably in God tier. A BM Hunter, I think it's actually good in twos. It's more manageable because the damage is like a bit lower. I'm not as scared as before, because again, like intimidation stun being like 3 seconds instead of like 5 seconds previous season, it's a huge nerf. Freezing trap, the duration is nerfed, everything is nerfed. I think BM Hunter is actually like one of the losers from all those CC changes. I think Hunters in general is one of the losers with Mage, because it's highly like destroyable, like the CC wise, because of AoE. Highly stoppable as well. So I think it's still going to be A tier. Maybe I might put it in S tier, but I think A tier for now, because I feel like right now the damage is not okay compared to season 1. It's like the same problem as Arms Warrior, where they deal the same kind of damage from season 1, but the HP pools are higher, while other players, like for example Unholy DKs, they play season 2 like they are like a season 2 spec. And that's actually a good thing. Do not like over nerf things. You have to buff the underlying specs to actually make them enjoyable for everyone. I think it's quite completely fine to have like A tiers. I think God tiers is a bit over the top, but it's very hard to like nerf them in twos, while they are not that exceptional in threes. So it's very hard to balance it. But I think BM Hunter is A tier. I think MM is harder to play because of line of sight, and it's stoppable. It's easier to stop. You can disarm it pretty reliably. It's not as the same as in Soul Shuffle, where you sometimes you can just free cast. For me, it's going to be B tier. I think it's not that bad. I think just it's a lot worse than BM or Survival. I cannot really put them on the same tier, right? I want to talk about Warriors. I'm going to surprise a lot of people. I think Arms is not faring well in twos. I think it's average. I'm going to put it at the same level as a Retribution Paladin. Why I'm not putting him in C tier? Because I feel like it's like an injustice compared to the other specs that are in C tier. You can have some representation, but I do feel like there are hard stops to certain comps and certain matchups. Certain matchups or comps are going to say, "Look, you're an arms warrior. Too bad, man. You should reroll." That's kind of the feeling you can have as an arms warrior in twos. Um, it doesn't fare well. And it's the same problem as a lot of specs where they actually are pretty well in threes, but they're bad in social for in twos because of the dampening, because on how the bracket works and how they actually are sometimes alone in their fights. While in threes they have like a partner that can help them and peel them and actually like make them reach their targets. In twos you're going to get kited by most sorts of costs. Like survival hunter sometimes are very slippery, and even then now they have a disarm, so good luck with that. And if you're playing bleed build, they can just bandage themselves very quickly, and it's over. You don't have pressure anymore. Um, but I would not recommend to play bleeds build in queues though. I'm not really a fan of bleed builds, but I think it's too dampening to make it work. And arms is already dampened, so yeah, I mean, B tier. I think Fury is a bit better, but it's not that good as well. I think should I put in A tier? I'm thinking about the matchups. I think it's a bit better survival because Steel Trap can get blood raged. I think versus Cost is quite nice as well. I think Retribution Paladin, yeah, me. I'm going to put them on the same level as Havoc Demon. So again, do not think like it's very strong because again, it's the same for trees. Where in trees they are not that good as like compared to a lot of like things going on. In social fall they are a bit better because of how they play and how the dampening is working and how the onslaught can happen without coordination. But I think in coordinated gameplay they are not that good. While in twos again it's a bit chaotic because it's a 2v2 more personal thing. You can actually have a bit of more uptime, but it's really highly dependent on like matchups. I could even like make a matchup video for like in play like a tournament style. Well, you can see matchup per matchup how a spec can fare, and you can see that Fury can win versus a multiple of the A tiers, but lose pretty hard versus let's say a survival hunter, even a feral druid can kill a Fury warrior pretty heavily. Protection warrior is actually surprisingly going to be C tier. I think you can reliably make it work. You kind of have to play with like let's say someone that is very tanky in it and actually has some healing towards itself. But I played with Feral Druid once. It worked pretty well. I played with a unholy DK. It didn't work that well. So it's very random, but it's also very matchup reliant. If you're facing, let's say, frost mages, you're not going to play the game. But if you're facing, let's say, a arms warrior, your 40% DR damage reduction you're going to give to your ally is invaluable. It's insane. It's but the bodyguard PvP talent is actually like the embodiment on how a tank can actually work in RPGs. Unfortunately, a tank is actually like kind of expected to take the flag, unfortunately. But a tank can actually be a very good support spec, like for example, bodyguard, where you're actively going to switch your bodyguards depending on the focus of the enemy team. And that's actually a good thing that you can actually keep for the support kind of gameplay that you can bring for PvP. I think it doesn't really work in 3v3 or because it's too obnoxious if it's too strong. I think in 4v4, if there is a 4v4, you can actually add a support a role. I think protection warrior can actually make it work without the tankiness. Just throw the tankiness away, but the support kind of feel can actually be super important for the future of PvP if they actually add sometime like a 4v4 kind of bracket. Which I think they will not do that. But anyways, let's talk about classes right now. I think I didn't really talk too much about classes. I think Fire Mage, Arcane, and Frost can work in RMP, in RM, so Rogue Mage. I don't think it's like fantastic with a healer. You can make Fire Mage with a Holy Priest work. I'm gonna put them in. I think Arcane is the B tier though. You can do double Arcane and be like obnoxious, but it's very cheesy. Some people are like dropping MMR to make it work in a video, which is good. But you have to drop MMR and then you can one shot people and then you have to drop it again to make another video, for example. I don't think it's like super reliable most of the time. But it's still a mage which you can kite most of the things and you can actually make it work with a rogue. Fire mage this as well. I do feel like it's lowish A. You can make it work with a rogue, but again it's too random. So I think Rogue Mage is not that good in twos anymore. That's how I see, at least. I think Rogue works well with a healer, but right now I think it's just an A tier spec. And Frost Mage is actually more stoppable, so I'm going to put it in B tier. You can play with a healer, which is again a kind of a dampening spec, but you can be very annoying, very like I would say slippery, and it's actually very annoying to kill a mage these days. Like especially as a melee, you see them blink everywhere. It's stupid, but they added displacement so easily on the class tree, so now everyone has it. But yeah, I think it can work. I think it's good to average. I think it's the same problem as a marksman, where if they're aligning you, you're not doing too much. So it is what it is. I want to talk about Warlocks. I think Destruction Warlock is a C tier spec. I don't think it works in twos. It's too easily stopped. Yes, if you're like a god tier Destruction Warlock, you can make it work. But most average Destruction Warlocks are going to struggle in twos because people are going to line you most of the time. And if they're not lining you, it means that they are not scared of you. So you're going to get destroyed probably. So be thinking about that. Affliction Warlock is a bit better because of how the bracket works, but also because of the association of Resto Druid. Affliction Warlock actually make it work. It's still average though. I think average to got good in the tier is I think a good comparison. It's not fantastic. They're stopped by multiple specs. But I think it's better than Affliction Warlock. That's why there is like a difference. I think Demonology Warlock is probably the better caster to play because they have a stun, they have a fear, they have coil, they have minions, they have actually more time to do a tyrant go. They're very squishy though, so it's very annoying to heal, but you can make it work depending on the spec you are. I think Demonology Warlock is like with an MS effect, one of the casters that I actually are more reliable to play with. I want to talk about Shaman first, I think. Shaman first. Resto Shaman is actually not that bad. I'm going to put in A tier. They have a lot of damage. I play it super aggressively whenever I'm playing a Resto Shaman. Might make guide about it. You have to play aggressive. If you're not playing aggressive, you're going to kind of diminish your own kit, and that's not really the play to do. In general, you're going to have a good time, but you have a lot of hard counters, and some people can just like say, look, you're a resto shaman, I'm going to go for you all the time, and that's your DPS that has to know how to peel. They can just like straight up go for the resto shaman like all game every day and destroy every single totem, and then becomes very hard to survive. But it's your job to actually survive towards like one melee. Rogue Mage, you should be able to win more reliably because you have Link, and you can actually link the Shadowy Duel. You're fine with that. But you have to play like very aggressive, in my opinion. Especially with Stormkeepers, if you have like the occasion to do Lava Burst, Stormkeepers, someone is going to get deleted, right? But you have to play like very aggressive to be able to reliably like killing blow. I would say a guy in front of you as a Resto Shaman. Enhancement Shaman is B tier ish. The same problem as a Retribution Paladin. You kind of have to play with it double DPS kind of comp. You can make it work with a healer, most likely with Fistweaver, for example. But I think in general, if you want to have the best success, it would be like with a DPS. And I would recommend a Warrior. I would recommend a Windwalker. I would recommend a Feral or a Retribution Paladin. I would recommend a Shadow Priest. But that's pretty much how and what I would recommend as an enhancement shaman, though. Elemental Shaman, I think it's not that good in twos. I think it's very hard to make it work. You can make it work with a Resto Druid, but it's also a dampening spec. And if the stars are lines, you can kill people, but often or not, the matches are going to be very long, and it will end probably in a very high dampening state. It's kind of the same as Shadowlands. I think Elemental Shaman is not really cut for twos. You can make it work. If you're godly, you make it work. But I think the average guy is going to pretty much suffer in twos, and not a lot of healers actually want to heal Elemental Shaman because they know they're going to be in very long games for the same kind of MMR than, let's say, with a Rogue or a Survival Hunter. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to put it in B tier. I think it's a right spot for them as Affliction Warlock. I think it's better than Destruction Warlock. That's why they're actually like a tier above. They're like the barometer for the C tiers for casters, I would say. because they're very close to B tier, but it's still better than Devastation. I think Devastation is like this, something like this. I think Blood Decay is a bit higher than them. Um, Outlaw Rogue, I think they miss a lot of damage. You can make it work with CC, which often can win games because of that. But there is something about them. I don't think it's like I'm going to put it in C tier or B tier maybe because it's a rogue. They can win with CC, but I don't think like CC is not everything in twos because I think mostly you win because of dampening. That's how it works in twos, and with your CD's usage and how you're using it and how you're actually like enable the maximum damage possible with it. Um, I'm going to put it as the best C tier because I think Outlaw Rogue is not in a great state. You're going to say to me that Outlaw Rogue is like not that bad, and I understand and hear. But I think the damage is like kinda how it's been for a lot of specs, aligning the stars. But for Auto Rogue, it is in a state where you're trying to align the stars on other stars, and other stars has to be there to actually be like perfect where you're going to kill someone. For me, it's going to be C tier. Assassination Rogue, I'm going to put it in B tier. The reason is a lot of specs actually counter their goes. It's actually very easy to stop a death mark. And yes, if they death mark and get a PI, they're going to kill someone. But you have to see the whole package. I do feel like any other spec in A tier does feel better than Assassination Rogue right now. And Assassination Rogue kind of plays around how people are actually disrespecting their like damage, and they're dampening ways to make those damage. I think the nerfs to the Shiv healing reduction is quite big. Actually made them a lot worse with no compensation to the damage proportions they actually got nerfed previous patches. And right now they're like in a state of limbo where they're good in twos but bad in threes, and except in certain comps. And in social for it's really too random to make it work. For me, it's going to be B tier for twos in as an assassination rogue. I want to talk about subtlety rogue. I think subtlety rogue in twos is very good. You can play with a DPS, you can play with a healer. Again, with a healer, you have more times and more ghosts that you can go for. And with a DPS, you have to play more perfectly. But for me, it's going to be a S tier spec as well. I'm going to sort a bit the tier list. I feel like I do need a bit more S tiers. Sub Rogue is strong, very strong. I think they work with Holy Priest pretty perfectly. Can even work with a Disc Priest. They are very tanky, so it's not even fun to go for the Sub Rogue most of the time. You can play with Vanish Shield because again they don't have to play like longer dances. Um, so you're kind of facing a tank if you're facing sub rogue, and you have to go for the healer most of the time, or you kind of have to cleave them, which is not an easy task versus a sub rogue. And if you're like out positioned, you get smoke bombs or a shadowy duel or whatever they're going to try to do, and secret technique is going to hit pretty hard. It's not hitting as hard as previous like patches, but it's still there, and you can still die because of that. Now I'm going to sort it up. I think BM Hunter is S tier. I think Windwalker is more S tier than Unholy DK. Unholy DK is very close to S tier, but for me it's going to be the barometer for A tier. I think healer wise, I do feel like my opinion. I think Holy Paladin is not that bad in twos. It's just they are very matchup dependent. I do feel like like priests are really a nightmare for Holy Paladin. I'm going to put I'm going to put this priest in S tier because of the double damage proportions, but they're very close to the A tiers. I think they're very close to those two, and then you have like mistweaver a bit lagging out. On the A tiers, like close to the B tier. I don't think there's like a real B tier healer, except like again preservation. If you want to see that way, I think it could be B tier. Personally, I see that as a C tier because it doesn't work that well in twos. Um, so that is pretty much the S tiers, the God tiers. I think that's correct. Something like that. I think something like that should be correct. And then B tiers, you have like, this is like, it's not really ordered, right? This is pretty much like, it could be A tier really, like with a buff, but I think this is pretty correct. And then you have like C tier, which is going to be controversial, and then you have the D tiers, which I think Frost DK is probably the worst DPS spec out there. And those two, I have no statistics nor experience with it, so I don't know if they're good, better or not. But anyways, thank you for watching this video. I really appreciate you. Be sure to subscribe to the channel because we do PvP content and we love PvP, right? We want to do guides, we want to do PvP, we want to do soul shuffle, RPGs, BGs, 2v2, 3v3, soul shuffle, whatever you want. I have it. So please subscribe. And again, like the video if you like the video, because we do like PvP and we like Torgrid, right? I hope so. But anyways, we can comment and we can discuss about it in the comment section below. I try to always comment back or like give it a reaction. If I feel like I have nothing to add, I will react on it with a heart. But anyways, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Be sure to stay safe. We will catch you very soon in the next video. Have a great day. Bye.